Jungkook dialed Ryan's number again and waited patiently. Soon his wife picked up the call and sneezed. He said worriedly. She said, but Jungkook knew that she wasn't okay. He asked, she answered. Jungkook hummed and decided to stay on the phone for a while longer just because he was so much worried about her health. Her weak voice made Jungkook frown. He assured her he heard her sigh in relief. After hanging up, he went to prepare his things so he could go back to his wife. He sighed annoyed. Jungkook stood up as soon as he heard his assistant. His secretary handed him a file. He said while looking through the file. Once his assistant left, he opened the file and walked out of the office. Sitting on the couch, she was continuously sniffing. She wiped her tear while her focused on the laptop screen. Used tissues were scattered on the floor around her, and her eyes were slightly swollen from crying. But the thing is that was annoying her the most that the drama is not helping her to distract. She sobbed and rubbed her nose with the tissue. She whispered under her breath, hoping that somehow she would receive a text message from him telling her that he is already near. She was sulking, waited for her husband. She cried again because of the sickness. She needed someone to hug her tightly and tell her it was gonna get better. She pouted while wiping her tears aggressively. She immediately looked at the door and found Jungkook holding snacks for her. She sulked and looked away. She muttered. Jungkook apologized with a small smile on his face. He placed the snacks on the coffee table and sat down next to her. She pouted again, making Jungkook's heart melt. He leaned closer and hugged her from behind. He whispered into her ear. She whined. Jungkook gently brushed a strand off her forehead. She looked at him with her swollen eyes and pouted lips. He chuckled quietly and pecked her lips softly. She giggled and snuggled her face further into his chest. Ryan gasped dramatically and pulled away from him to look at him properly. She sat and started laughing. She pouted and tried to hide her reddened cheeks. Jungkook chuckled and caressed her cheek. He then pecked her lips softly. She mumbled and buried her face into his chest once again. He reassured her. She looked up at him and nodded. Then she laid her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. Jungkook wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her closer to himself. She murmured with her eyes closed. Jungkook chuckled softly and kissed her forehead lovingly. Ryan looked away when Jungkook tried to feed her soup. Jungkook smiled at her cuteness. She frowned, crossing her arms. Jungkook paddled, grabbing her spoon and feeding her again. Ryan grew annoyed by his stubbornness. He said with puppy eyes. She sighed. She nodded and took a spoonful of soup in her mouth. Wyan smiled. He smiled and wiped her face. She giggled. Jungkook kissed her forehead lovingly. He continued stroking her hair. Wyan nodded her head and spread her arms, indicating Jungkook to pick her up. He obliged and lifted her into his arms, bridal style, carrying her to her room.